Chapter III. He waked up late next day after a broken sleep, but his sleep had not refreshed him. He waked up bilious, irritable, ill-tempered, and looked with hatred at his room. It was a tiny cupboard of a room about 6 paces in length. It had a poverty-stricken appearance, with its dusty yellow paper peeling off the walls, and it was so low-pitched that a man of more than average height was ill at ease in it and felt every moment that he would knock his head against the ceiling. The furniture was in keeping with the room. There were 3 old chairs, rather rickety, a painted table in the corner on which lay a few manuscripts and books. The dust that lay thick upon them showed that they had been long untouched. A big clumsy sofa occupied almost the whole of one wall and half the floor space of the room. It was once covered with chintz, but was now in rags and served Raskolnikov as a bed. Often he went to sleep on it, as he was, without undressing, without sheets, wrapped in his old student's overcoat, with his head on one little pillow, under which he heaped up all the linen he had, clean and dirty. By way of a bolster, a little table stood in front of the sofa. It would have been difficult to sink to a lower ebb of disorder, but to Raskolnikov, in his present state of mind, this was positively agreeable. He had got completely away from everyone, like a tortoise in its shell, and even the sight of a servant girl, who had to wait upon him, and looked sometimes into his room, made him writhe with nervous irritation. He was in the condition that overtakes some monomaniacs entirely concentrated upon one thing. His landlady had for the last fortnight given up sending him in meals, and he had not yet thought of expostulating with her. Though he went without his dinner, Nastasia, the cook and only servant, was rather pleased at the lodger's mood, and had entirely given up sweeping and doing his room. Only once a week or so she would stray into his room with a broom. She waked him up that day. "Get up! Why are you asleep?" she called to him. "It's past 9. I have brought you some tea. Will you have a cup? I should think you're fairly starving." Raskolnikov opened his eyes, started, and recognized Nastasia. "From the landlady, eh?" he asked, slowly and with a sickly face, sitting up on the sofa. "From the landlady, indeed." She set before him her own cracked teapot full of weak and stale tea, and laid the yellow lumps of sugar by the side of it. "Here, Nastasia, take it please," he said, fumbling in his pocket, for he had slept in his clothes, and taking out a handful of coppers. "Run and buy me a loaf, and give me a little sausage, the cheapest, at the pork butcher's. The loaf I'll fetch you this very minute. But wouldn't you rather have some cabbage soup instead of sausage? It's capital soup. Yesterday's. I saved it for you yesterday, but you came in late. It's fine soup." When the soup had been brought, and he had begun upon it, Nastasia sat her down beside him on the sofa and began chatting. She was a country peasant woman, and a very talkative one. "Praskovya Pavlovna means to complain to the police about you," she said. He scowled. "To the police? What does she want?" "You don't pay her money, and you won't turn out of the room. That's what she wants, to be sure." "The devil! That's the last straw," he muttered, grinding his teeth. "No, that would not suit me, just now. She's a fool," he added aloud. "I'll go and talk to her today. Fool she is, and no mistake, just as I am. But why, if you are so clever, do you lie here like a sack and have nothing to show for it? One time you used to go out, you say, to teach children. But why is it you do nothing now?" "I am doing," Raskolnikov began sullenly and reluctantly. "What are you doing?" "Work." "What sort of work?" "I am thinking," he answered seriously after a pause. Nastasia was overcome with a fit of laughter. She was given to laughter, and when anything amused her, she laughed inaudibly, quivering and shaking all over, till she felt ill. "And have you made much money by your thinking?" she managed to articulate at last. "One can't go out to give lessons without boots, and I'm sick of it." "Don't quarrel with your bread and butter. They pay so little for lessons. What's the use of a few coppers?" he answered, reluctantly, as though replying to his own thought. "And you want to get a fortune all at once?" He looked at her strangely. "Yes, I want a fortune," he answered firmly, after a brief pause. "Don't be in such a hurry. You quite frighten me. Shall I get you the loaf or not?" "As you please." I forgot. A letter came for you yesterday when you were out." "A letter? For me? From whom?" "I can't say. I gave 3 kopecks of my own to the postman for it. Will you pay me back?" "Then bring it to me. For God's sake, bring it!" cried Raskolnikov, greatly excited. Good God! A minute later the letter was brought him. That was it, from his mother, from the province of R. He turned pale when he took it. It was a long while since he had received a letter, but another feeling also suddenly stabbed his heart. "Nastasia, leave me alone, for goodness' sake. Here are your 3 kopecks, but for goodness' sake, make haste and go." The letter was quivering in his hand. He did not want to open it in her presence. He wanted to be left alone with this letter. When Nastasia had gone out, he lifted it quickly to his lips and kissed it. Then he gazed intently at the address, the small, sloping handwriting, so dear and familiar, of the mother who had once taught him to read and write. He delayed. He seemed almost afraid of something. At last he opened it. It was a thick, heavy letter, weighing over 2 ounces. 2 large sheets of note paper were covered with very small handwriting. "My dear Raya," wrote his mother, "it's 2 months since I last had a talk with you by letter, which has distressed me and even kept me awake at night, thinking, but I am sure you will not blame me for my inevitable silence. You know how I love you. You are all we have to look to, Donia and I. You are our all, our one hope, our one stay. What a grief it was to me when I heard that you had given up the university some months ago for want of means to keep yourself, and that you had lost your lessons and your other work. How could I help you out of my 120 rubles a year pension? The 15 rubles I sent you from months ago I borrowed, as you know, on security of my pension, from Vasily Ivanovich Vorushin, a merchant of this town. He is a kind-hearted man and was a friend of your father's too. But having given him the right to receive the pension, I had to wait till the debt was paid off, and that is only just done, so that I've been unable to send you anything all this time. But now, thank God, I believe I shall be able to send you something more, and in fact, we may congratulate ourselves on our good fortune now, of which I hasten to inform you. In the first place, would you have guessed, dear Radia, that your sister has been living with me for the last 6 weeks, and we shall not be separated in the future? Thank God, her sufferings are over. But I will tell you everything in order, so that you may know just how everything has happened and all that we have hitherto concealed from you. When you wrote to me 2 months ago that you had heard that Donia had a great deal to put up with in the Sidrigalov's house, when you wrote that and asked me to tell you all about it, could I write an answer to you? If I have written the whole truth to you, I dare say you would have thrown up everything and have come to us, even if you had to walk all the way, for I know your character and your feelings, and you would not let your sister be insulted. I was in despair myself, but what could I do? And, besides, I did not know the whole truth myself then. What made it all so difficult was that Donia received 100 rubles in advance when she took the place as governess in their family, on condition of part of her salary being deducted every month, and so it was impossible to throw up the situation without repaying the debt. This sum now I can explain it all to you, my precious Radia. She took chiefly in order to send you 60 rubles, which you needed so terribly then, and which you received from us last year. We deceived you then, writing that this money came from Donia's savings. But that was not so, and now I tell you all about it, because, thank God, things have suddenly changed for the better, and that you may know how Donia loves you and what a heart she has. At first, indeed, Mr. Svidrigailov treated her very rudely, and used to make disrespectful and jeering remarks at table. But I don't want to go into all those painful details, so as not to worry you for nothing when it is now all over. In short, in spite of the kind and generous behavior of Marfa Petrovna, Mr. Svidrigailov's wife, and all the rest of the household, Donia had a very hard time, especially when Mr. Svidrigailov, relapsing into his old regimental habits, was under the influence of Bacchus. And how do you think it was all explained later on? Would you believe that the crazy fellow had conceived a passion for Donia from the beginning, but had concealed it under a show of rudeness and contempt? Possibly he was ashamed and horrified himself at his own flighty hopes, considering his years and as being the father of a family, and that made him angry with Donia. And possibly, too, he hoped by his rude and sneering behavior to hide the truth from others. But at last he lost all control and had the face to make Donia an open and shameful proposal, promising her all sorts of inducements and offering, besides, to throw up everything and take her to another estate of his, or even abroad. You can imagine all she went through. To leave her situation at once was impossible, not only on account of the money debt, but also to spare the feelings of Marfa Petrovna, whose suspicions would have been aroused. And then Donia would have been the cause of a rupture in the family, and it would have meant a terrible scandal for Donia too. That would have been inevitable. There were various other reasons, owing to which Donia could not hope to escape from that awful house for another 6 weeks. You know Donia, of course. You know how clever she is, and what a strong will she has. Donia can endure a great deal, and even in the most difficult cases, she has the fortitude to maintain her firmness. She did not even write to me about everything for fear of upsetting me, although we were constantly in communication. It all ended very unexpectedly. Marfa Petrovna accidentally overheard her husband imploring Donia in the garden, and, putting quite a wrong interpretation on the position, threw the blame upon her, believing her to be the cause of it all. An awful scene took place between them on the spot in the garden. Marfa Petrovna went so far as to strike Donia, refused to hear anything, and was shouting at her for a whole hour, and then gave orders that Donia should be packed off at once to me in a plain peasant's cart, into which they flung all her things, her linen and her clothes, all pell-mell, without folding it up and packing it. And a heavy shower of rain came on, too, and Donia, insulted and put to shame, had to drive with a peasant in an open cart, all the Senkinverse into town. Only think now, what answer could I have sent to the letter I received from you 2 months ago, and what could I have written? I was in despair. I dared not write to you the truth, because you would have been very unhappy, mortified and indignant. And yet what could you do? You could only perhaps ruin yourself. And, besides, Donia would not allow it, and fill up my letter with trifles when my heart was so full of sorrow. I cannot, for a whole month, The town was full of gossip about this scandal, and it came to such a pass that Donia and I dare not even go to church, on account of the contemptuous looks, whispers, and even remarks made aloud about us. All our acquaintances avoided us. Nobody even bowed to us in the street, and I learnt that some shopmen and clerks were intending to insult us in a shameful way, smearing the gates of our house with pitch, so that the landlord began to tell us we must leave. All this was set going by Marfa Petrovna, who managed to slander Donia and throw dirt at her in every family. She knows everyone in the neighborhood, and that month she was continually coming into the town. And as she is rather talkative and fond of gossiping about her family affairs, and particularly of complaining to all and each of her husband, which is not at all right, so in a short time she had spread her story not only in the town, but over the whole surrounding district. It made me ill, but Donia bore it better than I did, and if only you could have seen how she endured it all, and tried to comfort me and cheer me up. She is an angel, but by God's mercy, our sufferings were cut short. Mr. Sidrigalov returned to his senses and repented, and, probably feeling sorry for Donia, he laid before Marfa Petrovna a complete and unmistakable proof of Donia's innocence, in the form of a letter Donia had been forced to write and give to him before Marfa Petrovna came upon them in the garden. This letter, which remained in Mr. Svidrigalov's hands after her departure, she had written to refuse personal explanations and secret interviews, for which he was entreating her. In that letter she reproached him with great heat and indignation for the baseness of his behavior in regard to Marfa Petrovna, reminding him that he was the father and head of a family, and telling him how infamous it was of him to torment and make unhappy a defenseless girl, unhappy enough already. Indeed, dear Radia, the letter was so nobly and touchingly written that I sobbed when I read it, and to this day I cannot read it without tears. Moreover, the evidence of the servants, too, cleared Donia's reputation. They had seen and known a great deal more than Mr. Svidrigalov had himself supposed, as indeed is always the case with servants. Marfa Petrovna was completely taken aback, and again crushed, as she said herself to us, but she was completely convinced of Donia's innocence. The very next day, being Sunday, she went straight to the cathedral, knelt down and prayed with tears to Our Lady to give her strength to bear this new trial and to do her duty. Then she came straight from the cathedral to us, told us the whole story, wept bitterly, and, fully penitent, she embraced Donia and besought her to forgive her. The same morning, without any delay, she went round to all the houses in the town and everywhere, shedding tears. She asserted in the most flattering terms Donia's innocence and the nobility of her feelings in her behavior. What was more, she showed and read to everyone the letter in Donia's own handwriting to Mr. Sidrigalov, and even allowed them to take copies of it, which I must say I think was superfluous. In this way she was busy for several days in driving about the whole town, because some people had taken offense through precedence having been given to others, and therefore they had to take turns, so that in every house she was expected before she arrived, and everyone knew that on such and such a day Marfa Petrovna would be reading the letter in such and such a place, and people assembled for every reading of it, even many who had heard it several times already, both in their own houses and in other people's. In my opinion, a very great deal of all this was unnecessary, but that's Marfa Petrovna's character. Anyway, she succeeded in completely re-establishing Donia's reputation, and the whole ignominy of this affair rested as an indelible disgrace upon her husband, as the only person to blame, so that I really begin to feel sorry for him. It was really treating the crazy fellow too harshly. Donia was at once asked to give lessons in several families, but she refused. All of a sudden, everyone began to treat her with marked respect, and all this did much to bring about the event by which, one may say, our whole fortunes are now transformed. You must know, dear Radia, that Donia has a suitor, and that she has already consented to marry him. I hasten to tell you all about the matter, and though it has been arranged without asking your consent, I think you will not be aggrieved with me or with your sister on that account, for you will see that we could not wait and put off our decision till we heard from you, and you could not have judged all the facts without being on the spot. This was how it happened. He is already of the rank of a counselor, Fyodor Petrovich Lushin, and is distantly related to Marfa Petrovna, who has been very active in bringing the match about. It began with his expressing to her his desire to make our acquaintance. He was properly received, drank coffee with us, and the very next day he sent us a letter in which he very courteously made an offer, and begged for a speedy and decided answer. He is a very busy man, and is in a great hurry to get to Petersburg, so that every moment is precious to him. At first, of course, we were greatly surprised, as it had all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. We thought and talked it over the whole day. He is a well-to-do man, to be depended upon. He has to post in the government, and has already made his fortune. It is true that he is 45 years old, but he is of a fairly prepossessing appearance, and might still be thought attractive by women, and he is altogether a very respectable and presentable man, only he seems a little morose and somewhat conceited, but possibly that may only be the impression it makes at first sight. And beware, dear Radia, when he comes to Petersburg, as he shortly will do, beware of judging him too hastily and severely, as your way is. If there is anything you do not like in him at first sight, I give you this warning, although I feel sure that it will make a favorable impression upon you. Moreover, in order to understand any man, one must be deliberate and careful to avoid forming prejudices and mistaken ideas, which are very difficult to correct and get over afterwards. And Pyotr Petrovitch, judging by many indications, is a thoroughly estimable man. At his first visit, indeed, he told us that he was a practical man, but still he shares, as he expressed it, many of the convictions of our most rising generation, and he is an opponent of all prejudices. He said a good deal more, for he seems a little conceited and likes to be listened to, but this is scarcely a vice. I, of course, understood very little of it, but Donia explained to me that, though he is not a man of great education, he is clever and seems to be good-natured. You know your sister's character, Radia. She is a resolute, sensible, patient and generous girl, but she has a passionate heart, as I know very well. Of course, there is no great love either on his side or on hers, but Donia is a clever girl and has the heart of an angel, and will make it her duty to make her husband happy who on his side will make her happiness his care. Of that we have no good reason to doubt, though it must be admitted the matter has been arranged in great haste. Besides, he is a man of great prudence, and he will see, to be sure, of himself, that his own happiness will be the more secure, the happier Donia is with him. And as for some defects of character, for some habits, and even certain differences of opinion which indeed are inevitable even in the happiest marriages, Donia has said that, as regards all that, she relies on herself, that there is nothing to be uneasy about, and that she is ready to put up with a great deal, if only their future relationship can be an honorable and straightforward one. He struck me, for instance, at first, as rather abrupt, but that may well come from his being an outspoken man, and that is no doubt how it is. For instance, at his second visit, after he had received Donia's consent, in the course of conversation, he declared that before making Donia's acquaintance, he had made up his mind to marry a girl of good reputation, without dowry and, above all, one who had experienced poverty, because, as he explained, a man ought not to be indebted to his wife, but that it is better for a wife to look upon her husband as her benefactor. I must add that he expressed it more nicely and politely than I have done, for I have forgotten his actual phrases and only remember the meaning. And, besides, it was obviously not said of design, but slipped out in the heat of conversation, so that he tried afterwards to correct himself and smooth it over. But all the same, it did strike me as somewhat rude, and I said so afterwards to Donia. But Donia was vexed, and answered that words are not deeds, and that, of course, is perfectly true. Donia did not sleep all night before she made up her mind. Thinking that I was asleep, she got out of bed, and was walking up and down the room all night. At last she knelt down before the icon and prayed long and fervently, and in the morning she told me that she had decided. I have mentioned already that Pyotr Petrovitch is just setting off for Petersburg, where he has a great deal of business, and he wants to open a legal bureau. He has been occupied for many years in conducting civil and commercial litigation, and only the other day he won an important case. He has to be in Petersburg, because he has an important case before the Senate. So, Radia dear, he may be of the greatest use to you, in every way indeed, and Donia and I have agreed that from this very day you could definitely enter upon your career and might consider that your future is marked out and assured for you. Oh, if only this comes to pass, this would be such a benefit that we could only look upon it as a providential blessing. Donia is dreaming of nothing else. We have even ventured already to drop a few words on the subject to Pyotr Petrovitch. He was cautious in his answer, and said that, of course, as he could not get on without a secretary, it would be better to be paying a salary to a relation than to a stranger, if only the former were fitted for the duties, as though there could be doubt of your being fitted. But then he expressed doubts whether your studies at the university would leave you time for work at his office. The matter dropped for the time, but Donia is thinking of nothing else now. She has been in a sort of fever for the last few days, and has already made a regular plan for your becoming in the end an associate and even a partner in Pyotr Petrovitch's business, which might well be, seeing that you are a student of law. I am in complete agreement with her, Radia, and share all her plans and hopes, and think there is every probability of realizing them. And in spite of Pyotr Petrovitch's evasiveness, very natural at present since he does not know you, Donia is firmly persuaded that she will gain everything by her good influence over her future husband. This she is reckoning upon. Of course we are careful not to talk of any of these more remote plans to Pyotr Petrovitch, especially of your becoming his partner. He is a practical man and might take this very coldly. It might all seem to him simply a date or dream. Nor has either Donia or I breathed a word to him of the great hopes we have of his helping us to pay for your university studies. We have not spoken of it in the first place, because it will come to pass of itself later on, and he will no doubt without wasting words offer to do it of himself, as though he could refuse Donia, that the more readily since you may, by your own efforts, become his right hand in the office, and receive this assistance not as a charity, but as a salary earned by your own work. Donia wants to arrange it all like this, and I quite agree with her. And we have not spoken of our plans for another reason. That is, because I particularly wanted you to feel on an equal footing when you first meet him. When Donia spoke to him with enthusiasm about you, he answered that one could never judge of a man without seeing him close, for oneself, and that he'll look forward to forming his own opinion when he makes your acquaintance. Do you know, my precious Radia, I think that perhaps for some reasons, nothing to do with Pyotr Petrovitch though, simply for my own personal, perhaps old womanish, fancies, I should do better to go on living by myself, apart, than with them, after the wedding. I am convinced that he will be generous and delicate enough to invite me, and to urge me to remain with my daughter for the future. And if he has said nothing about it hitherto, it is simply because it has been taken for granted. But I shall refuse. I have noticed more than once in my life that husbands don't quite get on with their mothers-in-law, and I don't want to be the least bit in anyone's way, and for my own sake, too, would rather be quite independent, so long as I have a crust of bread of my own, and such children as you and Donia. If possible, I would settle somewhere near you. For the most joyful piece of news, dear Radia, I have kept for the end of my letter. Know then, my dear boy, that we may, perhaps, be all together in a very short time, and may embrace one another again, after a separation of almost 3 years. It is settled for certain that Donia and I are to set off for Petersburg. Exactly when I don't know, but very, very soon, possibly in a week. It all depends on Pyotr Petrovitch, who will let us know when he has had time to look round him in Petersburg. To suit his own arrangements, he is anxious to have this ceremony as soon as possible, even before the fast of Our Lady, if it could be managed, or if that is too soon to be immediately after. Oh, with what happiness I shall press you to my heart. Donia is all excitement at the joyful thought of seeing you. She said one day in joke that she would be ready to marry Pyotr Petrovitch for that alone. She is an angel. She is not writing anything to you now, and has only told me to write that she has so much to tell you that she is not going to take up her pen now, for a few lines would tell you nothing, and it would only mean upsetting herself. She bids me send you her love and innumerable kisses. But although we shall be meeting so soon, perhaps I shall send you as much money as I can in a day or two. Now that everyone has heard that Donia is to marry Pyotr Petrovitch, my credit has suddenly improved, and I know that Afanasy Ivanovitch will trust me now, even to 75 rubles, on the security of my pension, so that perhaps I shall be able to send you 25 or even 30 rubles. I would send you more, but I am uneasy about our traveling expenses, for though Pyotr Petrovitch has been so kind as to undertake part of the expenses of the journey, that is to say, he has taken upon himself the conveyance of our bags and big trunk, which will be conveyed to some acquaintances of his, we must reckon upon some expense on our arrival in Petersburg, where we can't be left without a halfpenny, at least for the first few days. But we have calculated it all, Donia and I, to the last penny, and we see that the journey will not cost very much. It is only 90 versts from us to the railway, and we have come to an agreement with a driver we know, so as to be in readiness, and from there Donia and I can travel quite comfortably third class, so that I may very likely be able to send to you not 25, but 30 rubles. But enough, I have covered 2 sheets already, and there is no space left for more. Our whole history, but so many events have happened. And now, my precious Radia, I embrace you and send you a mother's blessing till we meet. Love Donia, your sister. Radia, love her as she loves you, and understand that she loves you beyond everything, more than herself. She is an angel, and you, Radia, you are everything to you, so one hope, our one consolation. If only you are happy, we shall be happy. Do you still say your prayers, Radia, and believe in the mercy of our Creator and our Redeemer? I am afraid in my heart that you may have been visited by the new spirit of infidelity that is abroad today. If it is so, I pray for you. Remember, dear boy, how in your childhood, when your father was living, you used to lisp your prayers at my knee, and how happy we all were in those days. Goodbye, till we meet. Theni embrace you warmly, with many kisses. Yours till death, Pulcherishkov. Almost from the first, while he read the letter, Raskolnikov's face was wet with tears. But when he finished it, his face was pale and distorted, and a bitter, wrathful and malignant smile was on his lips. He laid his head down on his threadbare dirty pillow and pondered a long time. His heart was beating violently, and his brain was in a turmoil. At last he felt cramped and stifled in the little yellow room that was like a cupboard or a box. His eyes and his mind craved for space. He took up his hat and went out, this time without dread of meeting anyone. He had forgotten his dread. He turned in the direction of the Vasilievsky Ostrov, walking along Vasilievsky Prospect, as though hastening on some business. But he walked, as his habit was, without noticing his way, muttering and even speaking aloud to himself, to the astonishment of the passers-by. Many of them took him to be drunk. Chapter IV. His mother's letter had been a torture to him, but as regards the chief fact in it, he had felt not one moment's hesitation, even whilst he was reading the letter. The essential question was settled, and irrevocably settled. In his mind, never such a marriage while I am alive, and Mr. Lucian be damned. The thing is perfectly clear, he muttered to himself, with a malignant smile, anticipating the triumph of his decision. No, mother, no, Donia, you won't deceive me. And then they apologized for not asking my advice, and for taking the decision without me. I dare say, they imagine it is arranged now and can't be broken off. But we will see whether it can or not. A magnificent excuse. Pyotr Petrovitch is such a busy man that even his wedding has to be in post-haste, almost by express. No, Donia, I see it all, and I know what you want to say to me. And I know, too, what you were thinking about when you walked up and down all night, and what your prayers were like before the Holy Mother of Kazan, who stands in Mother's bedroom. Peter is thus sent to Golgotha. So it is finally settled. You have determined to marry a sensible businessman, Avdotya Romanovna, one who has a fortune has already made his fortune. That is so much more solid and impressive. A man who holds to government posts and who shares the ideas of our most rising generation, as Mother writes, and who seems to be kind, as Donia herself observes. That seems beats everything, and that very Donia for that very seems is marrying him. Splendid, splendid. But I should like to know why Mother has written to me about our most rising generation, simply as a descriptive touch, or with the idea of prepossessing me in favor of Mr. Lucian. Oh, the cunning of them! I should like to know one thing more, how far they were open with one another that day and night, and all this time since. Was it all put into words, or did both understand that they had the same thing at heart and in their minds, so that there was no need to speak of it aloud, and better not to speak of it? Most likely it was partly like that. From Mother's letter it's evident he struck her as rude a little, and Mother in her simplicity took her observations to Donia, and she was sure to be vexed, and answered her angrily. I should think so. Who would not be angered, when it was quite clear without any naive questions, and when it was understood that it was useless to discuss it? And why does she write to me? Love Donia, Radia, and she loves you more than herself. Has she a secret conscience prick at sacrificing her daughter to her son? You are our one comfort. You are everything to us. Oh, Mother. His bitterness grew more and more intense, and if he had happened to meet Mr. Lucian at the moment, he might have murdered him. Oh, yes, that's true, he continued, pursuing the whirling ideas that chased each other in his brain. It is true that it needs time and care to get to know a man, but there is no mistake about Mr. Lucian. The chief thing is, he is a man of business and seems kind. That was something, wasn't it, to send the bags and big box for them? A kind man, no doubt after that, but his bride and her mother are to drive in a peasant's cart, covered with sacking. I know. I have been driven in it. No matter, it is only 90 versts, and then they can travel very comfortably. First class, for 1,000 versts. Quite right, too. One must cut one's coat according to one's cloth. But what about you, Mr. Lucian? She is your bride, and you must be aware that her mother has to raise money on her pension for the journey. To be sure, it's a matter of business. A partnership for mutual benefit, with equal shares and expenses, food and drink provided. The pay for your tobacco. The businessman has got the better of them, too. The luggage will cost less than their fares, and very likely go for nothing. How is it that they don't both see all that? Or is it that they don't want to see, and they are pleased? Pleased, and to think that this is only the first blossoming, and that the real fruits are to come. But what really matters is not the stinginess, is not the meanness, but the tone of the whole thing. For that will be the tone after marriage. It's a foretaste of it. And Mother, too. Why should she be so lavish? What will she have by the time she gets to Petersburg? 3 silver rubles or 2 paper ones, as she says. That old woman. What does she expect to live upon in Petersburg afterwards? She has her reasons already for guessing that she could not live with Donia after the marriage, even for the first few months. The good man has no doubt let slip something on that subject also, though Mother would deny it. He shall refuse, says she. On whom is she reckoning then? Is she counting on what is left of her 120 rubles of pension, when Afanasy Ivanovitch's debt is paid? She needs woolen shawls and embroiders cuffs, ruining her old eyes, and all her shawls don't add more than 20 rubles a year to her 120. I know that. So she is building all her hopes all the time on Mr. Lucian's generosity. Her will offer it of himself. He will press it on me. You may wait a long time for that. That's how it always is with these chivalresque noble hearts. Till the last moment, every goose is a swan with them. Till the last moment, they hope for the best and will see nothing wrong. And although they have an inkling of the other side of the picture, yet they won't face the truth till they are forced to. The very thought of it makes them shiver. They thrust the truth away with both hands, until the man they deck out in false colors puts a fool's cap on them with his own hands. I should like to know whether Mr. Lucian has any orders of merit. I bet he has the une in his buttonhole, and that he puts it on when he goes to dine with contractors or merchants. He will be sure to have it for his wedding, too. Enough of him. Confound him. Well, Mother, I don't wonder at. It's like her. God bless her. But how could Donia, darling, as though I did not know you? You were nearly 20 when I saw you last. I understood you then. Mother writes that Donia can put up with a great deal. I know that very well. I knew that 2 years and a half ago, and for the last 2.5 years I have been thinking about it, thinking of just that Donia can put up with a great deal. If she could put up with Mr. Svidrigailov and all the rest of it, she certainly can put up with a great deal. And now Mother and she have taken it into their heads that she can put up with Mr. Luzhin, who propounds the theory of the superiority of wives raised from destitution, in owing everything to their husband's bounty, will propounds it, too, almost at the first interview. Granted that he let it slip, though he is a sensible man, yet maybe it was not a slip at all, but he meant to make himself clear as soon as possible. But Donia, she understands the man, of course, but she will have to live with the man. Why, she'd live on black bread and water. She would not sell her soul. She would not barter her moral freedom for comfort. She would not barter it for all Schleswig-Holstein, much less Mr. Luzhin's money. No, Donia was not that sort when I knew her, and she is still the same, of course. Yes, there's no denying the Svidrigailovs are a bitter pill. It's a bitter thing to spend one's life a governess in the provinces for 200 rubles, but I know she would rather be a nigger on a plantation, or a let with a German master, than degrade her soul and her moral dignity by binding herself forever to a man whom she does not respect, and with whom she has nothing in common for her own advantage. And if Mr. Luzhin had been of unalloyed gold, or one huge diamond, she would never have consented to become his legal concubine. Why is she consenting then? What's the point of it? What's the answer? It's clear enough. For herself, for her comfort, to save her life, she would not sell herself. But for someone else she is doing it. For one she loves, for one she adores, she will sell herself. That's what it all amounts to. For her brother, for her mother, she will sell herself. She will sell everything. In such cases, we overcome our moral feeling, if necessary, freedom, taste, conscience even. All are brought into the market. Let my life go. If only my dear ones may be happy. More than that, we become casuists. We learn to be Jesuitical, and for a time maybe we can soothe ourselves. We can persuade ourselves that it is one's duty for a good object. That's just like us. It's as clear as daylight. It's clear that Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov is the central figure in the business, and no one else. Oh, yes, she can ensure his happiness, keep him in the university, make him a partner in the office, make his whole future secure. Perhaps he may even be a rich man later on, prosperous, respected, and may even end his life a famous man. But my mother, it's all Radia, precious Radia, her firstborn, for such a son who would not sacrifice such a daughter. Oh, loving, over partial hearts. Why, for his sake we would not shrink even from Sonia's fate. Sonia Marmeladov, the eternal victim so long as the world lasts. Have you taken the measure of your sacrifice, both of you? Is it right? Can you bear it? Is it any use? Is there sense in it? And let me tell you, Donia, Sonia's life is no worse than life with Mr. Luzhin. There can be no question of love. Mother writes. And what if there can be no respect either? If on the contrary there is aversion, contempt, repulsion, what then? So you will have to keep up your appearance, too. Is not that so? Do you understand what that smartness means? Do you understand that the Luzhin smartness is just the same thing as Sonia's, and may be worse, geiler, baser? Because in your case, Donia, it's a bargain for luxuries, after all. But with Sonia, it's simply a question of starvation. It has to be paid for. It has to be paid for. Donia, this smartness. And what if it's more than you can bear afterwards? If you regret it, the bitterness, the misery, the curses, the tears hidden from all the world, for you are not a Marfa Petrovna, and how will your mother feel then? Even now she is uneasy, she is worried, but then, when she sees it all clearly, and yes, indeed, what have you taken me for? I won't have your sacrifice, Donia, I won't have it. Mother, it shall not be, so long as I am alive, it shall not, I won't accept it. He has suddenly paused in his reflection and stood still. It shall not be. But what are you going to do to prevent it? You forbid it, and what right have you? What can you promise them on your side to give you such a right? Your whole life, your whole future, you will devote to them when you have finished your studies and obtained a post. Yes, we have heard all that before, and that's all words. But now something must be done. Now, do you understand that? And what are you doing now? You are living upon them. They borrow on their 100 rubles pension. They borrow from the Svidrigailovs. How are you going to save them from Svidrigailovs, from Afanasy Ivanovich Voroshin? Oh, future millionaire Zeus who would arrange their lives for them. In another 10 years, mother will be blind with knitting shawls, maybe with weeping too. She will be worn to a shadow with fasting. And my sister, imagine for a moment what may have become of your sister in 10 years. What may happen to her during those 10 years? Can you fancy? So it tortured himself, fretting himself with such questions, and finding a kind of enjoyment in it. And yet all these questions were not new ones suddenly confronting him. They were old familiar aches. It was long since they had first begun to grip and rend his heart. Long, long ago his present anguish had its first beginnings. It had waxed and gathered strength. It had matured and concentrated, until it had taken the form of a fearful, frenzied and fantastic question, which tortured his heart and mind, clamoring insistently for an answer. Now his mother's letter had burst on him like a thunderclap. It was clear that he must not now suffer passively, worrying himself over unsolved questions, but that he must do something, do it at once, and do it quickly. Anyway, he must decide on something, or else, or throw up life altogether. It cried suddenly, in a frenzy, accept one's lot humbly as it is, once for all, and stifle everything in oneself, giving up all claim to activity, life and love. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what it means when you have absolutely nowhere to turn? Marmeladov's question came suddenly into his mind, for every man must have somewhere to turn. He gave a sudden start. Another thought, that he had had yesterday, slipped back into his mind, but he did not start at the thought recurring to him, for he knew, he had felt beforehand, that it must come back. He was expecting it. Besides, it was not only yesterday's thought. The difference was that a month ago, yesterday even, the thought was a mere dream, but now it appeared not a dream at all. It had taken a new menacing and quite unfamiliar shape, and he suddenly became aware of this himself. He felt a hammering in his head, and there was a darkness before his eyes. He looked round hurriedly. He was searching for something. He wanted to sit down and was looking for a seat. He was walking along the gay boulevard. There was a seat about 100 paces in front of him. He walked towards it as fast he could, but on the way he met with a little adventure which absorbed all his attention. Looking for the seat, he had noticed a woman walking some 20 paces in front of him, but at first it took no more notice of her than of other objects that crossed his path. It had happened to him many times going home not to notice the road by which he was going, and he was accustomed to walk like that, but there was at first sight something so strange about the woman in front of him, that gradually his attention was riveted upon her, at first reluctantly and, as it were, resentfully, and then more and more intently. He felt a sudden desire to find out what it was that was so strange about the woman. In the first place, she appeared to be a girl quite young, and she was walking in the great heat bareheaded and with no parasol or gloves, waving her arms about in an absurd way. She had on a dress of some light silky material, but put on strangely awry, not properly hooked up, and torn open at the top of the skirt, close to the waist. A great piece was rent and hanging loose. A little kerchief was flung about her bare throat, but lay slanting on one side. The girl was walking unsteadily, too, stumbling and staggering from side to side. She drew Raskolnikov's whole attention at last. He overtook the girl at the seat, but, on reaching it, she dropped down on it. In the corner, she let her head sink on the back of the seat and closed her eyes, apparently in extreme exhaustion. Looking at her closely, he saw at once that she was completely drunk. It was a strange and shocking sight. He could hardly believe that he was not mistaken. He saw before him the face of a quite young, fair-haired girl, 16, perhaps not more than 15 years old. Pretty little face, but flushed and heavy-looking and, as it were, swollen. The girl seemed hardly to know what she was doing. She crossed one leg over the other, lifting it indecorously, and showed every sign of being unconscious that she was in the street. Raskolnikov did not sit down, but he felt unwilling to leave her, and stood facing her in perplexity. This boulevard was never much frequented, and now, at 2 o'clock, in the stifling heat, it was quite deserted. And yet on the further side of the boulevard, about 15 paces away, a gentleman was standing on the edge of the pavement. He, too, would apparently have liked to approach the girl with some object of his own. He, too, had probably seen her in the distance and had followed her, but found Raskolnikov in his way. He looked angrily at him, though he tried to escape his notice, instead impatiently biding his time, till the unwelcome man in rags should have moved away. His intentions were unmistakable. The gentleman was a plump, thickly set man, about 30, fashionably dressed, with a high color, red lips and moustaches. Raskolnikov felt furious. He had a sudden longing to insult this fat dandy in some way. He left the girl for a moment and walked towards the gentleman. "Hey, you, Sidrigalov, what do you want here?" he shouted, clenching his fists and laughing, spluttering with rage. "What do you mean?" the gentleman asked sternly, scowling in haughty astonishment. "Get away, that's what I mean. How dare you, you low fellow!" He raised his cane. Raskolnikov rushed at him with his fists, without reflecting that the stout gentleman was a match for two men like himself. But at that instant someone seized him from behind, and a police constable stood between them. "That's enough, gentlemen, no fighting, please, in a public place. What do you want? Who are you?" he asked Raskolnikov sternly, noticing his rags. Raskolnikov looked at him intently. He had a straightforward, sensible, soldierly face, with grey moustaches and whiskers. "You are just the man I want," Raskolnikov cried, catching at his arm. "I am a student, Raskolnikov. You may as well know that too," he added, addressing the gentleman. "Come along, I have something to show you," and taking the policeman by the hand, he drew him towards the seat. "Look here, helplessly drunk, and she has just gone down the boulevard. There is no telling who and what she is. She does not look like a professional. It's more likely she has been given drink and deceived somewhere. For the first time, you understand. And they've put her out into the street like that. Look at the way her dress is torn, and the way it has been put on. She has been dressed by somebody. She has not dressed herself, and dressed by unpracticed hands, by a man's hands. That's evident. And now look there. I don't know the dandy with whom I was going to fight. I see him for the first time, but he, too, has seen her on the road, just now, drunk, not knowing what she is doing, and now he is very eager to get hold of her, to get her away somewhere while she is in this state. That's certain. Believe me, I am not wrong. I saw him myself watching her and following her, but I prevented him, and he is just waiting for me to go away. Now he has walked away a little, and is standing still, pretending to make a cigarette. Think how can we keep her out of his hands, and how are we to get her home? The policeman saw it all in a flash. The stout gentleman was easy to understand. He turned to consider the girl. The policeman bent over to examine her more closely, and his face worked with genuine compassion. What a pity, he said, shaking his head. Why, she is quite a child. She has been deceived. You can see that at once. Listen, lady, he began addressing her. Where do you live? The girl opened her weary and sleepy-looking eyes, gazed blankly at the speaker, and waved her hand. Here, said Raskolnikov, feeling in his pocket and finding 20 kopecks. Here, call a cab and tell him to drive her to her address. The only thing is to find out her address. Missy, the policeman began again, taking the money. I'll fetch you a cab and take you home myself. Where shall I take you? Where do you live? Go away, they won't let me alone, the girl muttered, and once more waved her hand. I'll shock him. It's shameful. Missy, it's a shame. He shook his head again, shocked, sympathetic and indignant. It's a difficult job, the policeman said to Raskolnikov, and as it did so, he looked him up and down in a rapid glance. Too, must have seemed a strange figure to him, dressed in rags and handing him money. Did you meet her far from here? He asked him. I tell you she was walking in front of me, staggering, just here, in the boulevard. She only just reached the seat and sank down on it. The shameful things that are done in the world nowadays. God have mercy on us. An innocent creature like that, drunk already. She has been deceived. That's a sure thing. See how her dress has been torn too. The vice one sees nowadays, and as likely as not she belongs to gentlefolk too. Poor ones maybe. There are many like that nowadays. She looks refined, too, as though she were a lady, and he bent over her once more. Perhaps he had daughters growing up like that, looking like ladies and refined with pretensions to gentility and smartness. The chief thing is, Raskolnikov persisted, to keep her out of this scoundrel's hands. Why should he outrage her? It's as clear as day what he is after. The brute. He is not moving off. Raskolnikov spoke aloud and pointed to him. The gentleman heard him, and seemed about to fly into a rage again, but thought better of it, and confined himself to a contemptuous look. He then walked slowly another 10 paces away, and again halted. Keep her out of his hands we can, said the constable thoughtfully. If only she'd tell us where to take her. But as it is, Missy, Missy, he bent over her once more. She opened her eyes fully all of a sudden, looked at him intently, as though realizing something, got up from the seat, and walked away in the direction from which he had come. Oh, shameful wretches, they won't let me alone, she said, waving her hand again. She walked quickly, though staggering as before. The dandy followed her, but along another avenue, keeping his eye on her. Don't be anxious, I won't let him have her, the policeman said resolutely, and he set off after them. The vice one sees nowadays, he repeated aloud, sighing. At that moment, something seemed to sting Raskolnikov. In an instant, a complete revulsion of feeling came over him. Here, he shouted after the policeman. The latter turned round. Let them be. What is it to do with you? Let her go. Let him amuse himself. He pointed at the dandy. What is it to do with you? The policeman was bewildered, and stared at him open-eyed. Raskolnikov laughed. Well, ejaculated the policeman, with a gesture of contempt, and he walked after the dandy and the girl, probably taking Raskolnikov for a madman, or something even worse. He has carried off my 20 kopecks, Raskolnikov murmured angrily when he was left alone. Well, let him take as much from the other fellow to allow him to have the girl, and so let it end. And why did I want to interface? Is it for me to help? Have I any right to help? Let them devour each other alive. What is it to me? How did I dare to give him 20 kopecks? Were they mine? In spite of those strange words, he felt very wretched. He Saturday down on the deserted seat. His thoughts strayed aimlessly. He found it hard to fix his mind on anything at that moment. He longed to forget himself altogether, to forget everything, and then to wake up and begin life anew. Poor girl, he said, looking at the empty corner where she had Saturday. She will come to herself and weep, and then her mother will find out. She will give her a beating, a horrible, shameful beating, and then maybe turn her out of doors. And even if she does not, the Darya Frantsovnas will get wind of it, and the girl will soon be slipping out on the sly here and there. Then there will be the hospital directly. That's always the luck of those girls with respectable mothers, who go wrong on the sly, and then again the hospital, drink, the taverns, and more hospital, in 2 or 3 years wreck, in her life over at 18 or 19. Have not I seen cases like that, and how have they been brought to it? Why, they've all come to it like that. But what does it matter? That's as it should be. They tell us, a certain percentage, they tell us, must every year go, that way, to the devil, I suppose, so that the rest may remain chaste, and not be interfered with. A percentage, what splendid words they have. They are so scientific, so consolatory. Once you said percentage, there's nothing more to worry about. If we had any other word, maybe we might feel more uneasy. But what if only our one of the percentage of another one, if not that one? But where am I going? He thought suddenly. Strange, I came out for something. As soon as I had read the letter I came out. I was going to Vasilievsky Ostrov, to Razumihin. That's what it was. Now I remember. What for? Oh, and what put the idea of going to Razumihin into my head just now? That's curious. He wondered at himself. Razumihin was one of his old comrades at the university. It was remarkable that Raskolnikov had hardly any friends at the university. He kept aloof from everyone, went to see no one, and did not welcome anyone who came to see him, and indeed everyone soon gave him up. He took no part in the students' gatherings, amusements, or conversations. He worked with great intensity without sparing himself, and he was respected for this, but no one liked him. He was very poor, and there was a sort of haughty pride and reserve about him, as though he were keeping something to himself. He seemed to some of his comrades to look down upon them all as children, as though he were superior in development, knowledge, and convictions, as though their beliefs and interests were beneath him. With Razumihin he had got on, or, at least, he was more unreserved and communicative with him. Indeed, it was impossible to be on any other terms with Razumihin. He was an exceptionally good-humored and candid youth, good-natured to the point of simplicity, though both depth and dignity lay concealed under the simplicity. The better of his comrades understood this, and all were fond of him. He was extremely intelligent, though he was certainly rather a simpleton at times. He was of striking appearance, thin, black-haired, and always badly shaved. He was sometimes uproarious, and was reputed to be of great physical strength. One night, when out in a festive company, he had with one blow laid a gigantic policeman on his back. There was no limit to his drinking powers, but he could abstain from drink altogether. He sometimes went too far in his pranks, but he could do without pranks altogether. Another thing striking about Razumihin, no failure distressed him, and it seemed as though no unfavorable circumstances could crush him. He could lodge anywhere and bear the extremes of cold and hunger. He was very poor, and kept himself entirely on what he could earn by work of one sort or another. He knew of no end of resources by which to earn money. He spent one whole winter without lighting a stove, and used to declare that he liked it better, because one slept more soundly in the cold. For the present he, too, had been obliged to give up the university, but it was only for a time, and he was working with all his might to save enough to return to his studies again. Raskolnikov had not been to see him for the last 4 months, and Razumihin did not even know his address. About 2 months before, they had met in the street, but Raskolnikov had turned away, and even crossed to the other side, that he might not be observed. And though Razumihin noticed him, he passed him by, as he did not want to annoy him.